The night Tiana realized fear had a sound, it was in the way her son tried to breathe. Not cry, not whimper. Breathe. A thin, broken whistle scraped out of Mji's chest as he lay in the dim, cramped bedroom, sweat shining on his curls despite the cold air sneaking through the window frame. His small fingers clawed at her t-shirt, eyes wide with an animal panic that sliced through every other thought she had. Hey baby, it's okay," Tiana whispered, even though it wasn't. "Mama's here. Breathe with me, okay? In and out slow, come on G, like we practiced." She sat him upright against her body, one arm banded around his ribs, the other rubbing small circles on his back the way the pediatrician had shown her last winter when the attacks were mild and the doctor had called it something he'll grow out of. Back when the wheezing had sounded scary but manageable. When all she'd needed was a prescription and a promise. Back when she still believed promises. Tonight every rasp sounded wrong. Too loud. Too fast. The old inhaler lay useless on the nightstand, empty, the canister making a sad hollow rattle when she shook it. She'd known it was running low. Meant to refill it after her shift. Meant to do a lot of things that didn't fit between double shifts, late tuition payments, and a landlord who pretended the flickering hallway light was atmosphere. "Come on, baby," she whispered, voice shaking now. 1, 2, 3. G's chest hitched. The whistle turned into a choked cough. His lips, usually a soft brown pink, looked a shade too pale in the streetlight leaking through thin curtains. "Mama, can't," he gasped, voice paper thin. "Breathe." The words tore through her. Tiana's brain split cleanly into two selves. One wanted to dial emergency services, imagine clean white hallways and a competent doctor and a nebulizer machine humming him back to safety. The other remembered the last hospital bill, the months of collection calls, the way her name and address had ended up on forms she never agreed to sign. Remembered what Mrs. Hahn had said about enemies who made ordinary systems dangerous. The other self won for 3 stupid, precious seconds. No, we're okay, she lied to both of them. "Steam, that's what we'll do. Just like before. Bathroom, baby. Can you walk?" He tried to nod, failed. His head lolled against her shoulder, breaths coming in short, panicked bursts. Tiana scooped him up, his too light weight settling against her hip as she stumbled down the short hallway of their tiny apartment. The bathroom was barely big enough for the tub and the door, but she twisted the faucet to the hottest setting and closed them in, letting steam bloom heavy and fast around them. She sat on the closed toilet lid with him on her lap, rocking, counting his breaths. 1, 2, that's it baby 3. The air grew thick and wet. Sweat dampened her back, her hairline, the collar of her t-shirt. G's breath stayed high and shallow, every inhale a battle. "This isn't helping," she whispered into his curls. Her phone buzzed on the sink, probably Mrs. Kim asking if she could cover an extra morning shift. Or a debt reminder she'd swipe away and ignore. Tiana stared at the screen like it was something foreign. Out there in the glowing rectangle was a list of options. Ambulance. Taxi. Text message. The last thought slid in like a knife she'd hidden from herself for months. No. She shut her eyes, pressed her lips to Mji's damp temple. Smelled baby shampoo and saline in fear. Not him. Not that world. She had rebuilt her life around that one rule. Jihan Han did not exist. Not in their home, not in her contacts, not in bedtime stories. She'd left that universe behind with 2 suitcases and a heartbeat she'd chosen to protect over his empire. Mji wheezed again, a horrifying squeaking gasp. Tiny fingers clenched in her shirt, then went limp. Tiana's eyes flew open. He wasn't breathing any better. He might be breathing worse. "Mji," she said sharply. "Baby, look at mama." His eyes rolled toward her, glossy and unfocused. Something inside her cracked. "Okay," she whispered, but this time it wasn't to soothe. It was surrender. "Okay. You win. He wins. Whatever. I'm not losing you over my pride." She shifted him so his head rested in the crook of her arm, freeing one hand to fumble for the phone. Her thumb hovered over the keypad, shaking. No. Records. Questions. Papers that could circle back to people who read numbers like targets. A different number lived in her muscle memory, even after all these months. She had deleted it 3 times. Changed phones once. It didn't matter. Her body still knew the pattern of it, the way your tongue remembers a language you swore you'd never speak again. Tiana typed it without looking. The cursor blinked in the message box, accusatory. What could she even say? Hey, remember me, the woman who ran from your life and your money and your enemies? Surprise, you have a son, and he might die in my arms because I was too scared to use your name to save him? G gave a small, desperate, hitching sound. The words came from somewhere deeper than pride. Your son can't breathe. She stared at the line. It looked stark and ugly on the screen, void of hello or please or explanation. Just truth. Her thumb hovered over send. If she did this, there was no undo. Jihan would know. About the boy. About her. About the life she'd tried to build out of scraps and distance. His world would tilt toward theirs again, gravity and danger and all. A tiny hand tugged weakly at her collar. Mama. Tiana hit send. For half a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the message history lit up, delivered. Read. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Peered again. Her pulse pounded so loudly she almost didn't hear the first knock. Not a polite tap. A heavy, echoing hammer against the thin apartment door. Tiana flinched, clutching G tighter, heartbeat slamming into her ribs. That was impossible. It had been 60 seconds, maybe less. No one moved that fast. Unless they already had eyes on you. Open the door, Tiana. The voice carried cleanly through wood and steam and fear. Deeper and rougher than in her memories, but unmistakable. Jihan Han sounded like midnight and money and control. Like every mistake she'd promised never to repeat. Her knees almost buckled when she stood. Another knock, sharper this time. Now. The door exploded inward before Tiana had taken 3 steps down the hallway. Not the sound of breaking glass or splintering wood. Worse. The controlled violence of someone who knew exactly how much force a lock could take. The door swung open to a man in an obsidian suit, rain-slicked dark hair, and eyes that catalogued the entire apartment in the space of a heartbeat. Jihan Han had aged like a threat, sharper, colder, the kind of beautiful that made your body remember it was finite. Behind him stood a broad-shouldered bodyguard, hand on the frame, not touching anything. Just present. Witnessing. Jesus! Tiana gasped, clutching G tighter. The boy had gone rigid in her arms, confusion flickering across his fever-bright eyes. You can't just. Hand him to me, Jihan said. Not a request. Not even really a question. His voice had deepened since she'd last heard it. Rougher, like he'd screamed a lot in the years between then and now. It carried the weight of rooms he'd walked into and emptied of other people's comfort. No, Tiana said automatically, even as her knees were shaking. We're fine. We don't need. He's blue around the mouth, Tiana. And you texted me your son can't breathe at 3 in the morning. He stepped further into the apartment, and she heard the bodyguard close the door softly behind them. So either hand him over voluntarily, or I carry you both. The calculation happened in her chest. Fast and cold. He would do it. He had probably done worse things before breakfast. G wheezed a thin, desperate sound. Tiana moved. The transfer was clumsy. Her arms releasing the child as Jihan's came around him in a motion that was automatically cradling, automatically protective. And that was worse somehow. Worse than if he'd been careless. Worse than if he'd been rough. His hands were huge and dark-knuckled and entirely gentle as he settled Nji against his chest, one palm cupping the back of the boy's head. It's okay, little one, Jihan said. And his voice shifted into something softer, something that made Tiana's throat tighten. We're going to fix this. Nji's eyes were rolling, unfocused. He didn't respond, just breathed, wheezed. In that terrible broken rhythm. Where's his things? Jihan asked, already moving toward the bedroom. Wait, Tiana said uselessly, following. Wait, I need to. His jacket, he needs socks. The bodyguard had disappeared into the kitchen. She heard him opening drawers, moving with the efficiency of someone used to following orders in hostile territory. When he reappeared, he had a plastic grocery bag in one hand and was already moving toward the door. Pack a bag, Jihan called from the bedroom. Clothes, whatever he needs. 5 minutes. I'm not. Tiana started, but he emerged from the room already, and she saw herself reflected in his eyes. Wet t-shirt, bare feet, hair that hadn't been brushed in 36 hours, standing in an apartment that suddenly felt like a dollhouse compared to the sheer physical authority he was radiating. 5 years. She'd built 5 years of distance, and he'd erased it in the time it took to text back. Now, Tiana, he said, and there was something almost gentle in the inflection, which was somehow worse than a threat. She threw things into a duffel: Mji's favorite shirt, a pair of pants, underwear, socks, the stuffed animal he slept with. Her hands were shaking. She grabbed the inhaler prescription, his medical card, her wallet. Her mind was a carousel of things she was forgetting, but Jihan was already moving toward the door, Mji limp and fevered against his chest. The hallway was empty at this hour. The stairwell smelled like someone's cooking and stale air. By the time they reached the ground floor, a black sedan was idling at the curb, gleaming and wrong in this neighborhood like a shark in a bathtub. The bodyguard opened the back door. Jihan settled into the seat with Mji as carefully as if he were made of glass, and Tiana found herself sliding in beside them before she'd made a conscious decision to move. The door sealed shut. The city outside became a blur of neon and wet streets. "Hana Hospital," Jihan said in Korean to the driver, then switched to English, his eyes on Mji's face. "They have a pediatric wing and the best pulmonologist in Seoul. He just needs air," Tiana heard herself say. The steam would have. The steam didn't work. His tone wasn't cruel, just factual. Observational. His lips are cyanotic. His oxygen saturation is probably 70%. "We're going to a hospital." She wanted to fight. Wanted to remind him that she was the one who had kept Mji alive for 4 years, who had learned CPR from YouTube videos, and kept an emergency fund in a tin under the floorboards and made 1,000 choices every single day to keep him safe. Instead, she watched Jihan's hand spread across Mji's small back, feeling for the rhythm of his breathing, and she said nothing. The silence in the sedan was the kind that had weight. Tiana pressed herself against the window, the glass cold against her temple, and counted Mji's breaths like she could will them into steadier patterns. In, out, in, out. Jihan didn't speak, but his dark eyes never left their son's face. There was something terrifying about watching a man who clearly made life-or-death decisions for a living focus entirely on a 4-year-old's chest rising and falling. It made the danger feel retroactive, like everything he'd been doing in the years since she'd left had been leading to this moment, and now the focus was just redirected. "He's going to be fine," she said, and it sounded like a plea. "He just needs the medication." "He's had these before." "How many times?" Jihan asked quietly. 3. 4 maybe. "And you didn't tell me about any of them." It wasn't a question. Tiana's hands clenched in her lap. "I handled it," she said. "Alone. In a bathroom. At 3 in the morning." He shifted Mji slightly, adjusting his hold without looking away from the boy's face. "With an expired inhaler and no backup plan." "I didn't have a choice." "You did. You chose not to use it." His voice was still soft, which somehow made it more damning. "You chose to let him suffer rather than call me." The words landed like stones in still water. Tiana felt the ripples, felt the weight of them. "Your world is dangerous," she whispered. "The people you're involved with are not going to hurt my son because my son matters more to me than any business I have." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were black in the dim car light, unreadable and absolute. "That was always the problem, wasn't it? You didn't believe me when I said that." Tiana turned back to the window. Seoul slipped past in streaks of color. Convenience stores and darkened storefronts and the occasional neon glow. She thought about the night she'd left. Thought about the man with a gun in his coat pocket sitting across from Jihan in their kitchen. Thought about the way Jihan's hand had gone to her stomach where their child was still new, still theoretical, and thought about all the futures that wouldn't happen if she stayed. "You were right not to believe me," Jihan said, quieter still. "I wasn't careful enough. I hadn't figured out how to be both of those things at once. The man I needed to be, and the man you needed." Ji made a small pain sound. Jihan's attention snapped back to him like it had never left. "We're almost there," he murmured in Korean English, a mix of both. "Hold on, little one. Almost there." The car pulled up to a building that wasn't like other hospitals. Tiana had been to a clinic before. Cold linoleum, fluorescent lights, the smell of industrial cleaner and desperation. This was different. This was all clean glass and subtle lighting and a discreet sign that said, Han Private Medical Clinic. She understood then. Of course he had a private hospital. Of course he had doctors on speed dial, and a wing somewhere that opened at 3 in the morning for the people who paid enough money to make inconvenience irrelevant. The car door opened before Tiana could move. Jihan was already out, already moving, and she scrambled after him, the duffel bag forgotten on the seat. The automatic doors slid open like an invitation, and the world shifted. There was no waiting room, no clipboard, no receptionist who looked up slowly from filing her nails. Instead, there was a woman in a tailored white coat who seemed to materialize from the clinical white walls, and her entire posture changed the moment she saw Jihan's face. "Mr. Han," she said in Korean. Not a question. Recognition. Fear maybe, but the professional kind. "My son," Jihan said, in that same calm voice that had made Tiana's skin crawl in the car. "Severe asthma exacerbation. Cyanosis. Shallow respirations." The doctor's eyes flicked to Ji, and something in her face shifted into pure clinical mode. "Bring him to pediatric A. Now." A nurse appeared. Where was she coming from? And started walking so fast Tiana had to jog to keep up. Jihan moved with the kind of economical grace that came from never having to question where he belonged. Behind them, the bodyguard remained in the lobby, a still point in a turning world. "I'm staying with him," Tiana heard herself say loudly, in a hallway that suddenly felt like marble and money and absolutely no room for her. The nurse glanced back, and there was something in her expression, something like pity, that made Tiana's stomach drop. "Family is welcome in the private wing," the doctor said, still speaking Korean but with her eyes on Jihan. "But we need to work." "She stays," Jihan said flatly. "Both of them." The nurse hesitated. The doctor made a small gesture and it was done. They entered a room that looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital. Soft lighting, a child-sized bed, monitors that beeped with quiet importance. A man in wire-rimmed glasses was already there, already moving. "I'll need his history," the new doctor said, and he was older, with the kind of authority that came from decades of doing this. "Asthma diagnosis when?" 18 months old, Tiana said, and her voice sounded small. "First attack when he was 1 year old. Jihan finished, and she realized he was watching her, cataloging, filing away the gaps in what he'd missed. The doctors moved like a choreographed dance. Oxygen mask on Ji's face, IVs in his arm with the kind of practiced gentleness that came from doing this to terrified children every day, monitors beeping out a rhythm that seemed to slow, just slightly, under the onslaught of medication. Tiana reached from Ji's hand, and the monitor shifted its beeping pattern. Faster. Agitated. She was the one upsetting him. She let go. A nurse guided her gently toward the door. "The doctors need space," she said, kind but firm. Tiana moved without choosing to move. Jihan didn't follow. He stayed exactly where he was, and his presence seemed to fill the room, to bend light around himself. The doctors worked with the kind of focus that suggested they were very aware of exactly who was watching them. The hallway outside the room was a study in expensive silence. Tiana sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent and watched her hands shake. 53 minutes later, though it felt like both 5 minutes and 5 years, the older doctor emerged. He was smiling, which was the first good thing that had happened since Tiana woke up to the sound of her child dying. "He's stable," the doctor said, and he said it to both of them, Jihan and Tiana, though he looked at Jihan when he delivered the clinical details. "Severe exacerbation, yes, but his oxygen saturation has responded beautifully to the nebulizer and corticosteroids. We're keeping him overnight for observation, of course, but barring complications, he'll be ready to go home tomorrow." Tiana felt her knees soften with relief. Jihan's expression didn't change. "And the underlying cause?" he asked. "Uncontrolled asthma. Severe reactive. He should have had a rescue inhaler at home." The doctor paused, and Tiana felt the rebuke like a physical thing, heavy and deserved. "And potentially preventative medication. Albuterol at minimum." Silence. The kind that acknowledged fault. "He'll be on a regimen going forward," the doctor continued, looking at them both now with something like gentle admonishment, "including a daily maintenance medication. And you'll both need to." He paused on that word, both, as if he was suddenly aware that the situation in this hospital room was more complicated than a simple medical case. "You'll need to ensure he has emergency access to his rescue inhaler at all times." Asthma attacks can escalate quickly. He'll have access, Jihan said. In his home, in his school, on his person when he's old enough. He'll have access, Jihan repeated, and there was something final in it. Whatever it takes. The doctor nodded. Clearly, he was not a man who argued with Jihan Han about his promises. You can see him now, he said and stepped aside. If Tiana and Jihan's story is pulling at your heart, show some love. By hitting the like button right now, it helps this story reach more people who crave emotional Afro-Korean mafia romance. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because this channel uploads new stories like this every day. You don't want to miss what happens next. Quick question before we continue. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I want to know where my audience is coming from. Are you watching from Jamaica, Korea, the UK, America? Let me know. Tiana moved first. Needed to move. The room smelled like hospital and medicines and antiseptic, but underneath all of that was Mji, small and still, his tiny chest moving up and down with the nebulizer mask over his face, tubes running to his small arms. He looked impossibly fragile. Hi, baby, Tiana whispered, and her voice broke. She took his hand carefully, mindful of the four. Mama's here. You're okay. You're going to be okay. His eyes were closed. He didn't wake. Behind her, she heard Jihan step into the room. Heard him stop. Heard something that might have been a breath held too long. For years, he said quietly. Tiana didn't turn around. Yes. And he's mine. Not a question. A statement of fact. A claim. Yes, she said again, and heard the door to the room whisper open, the sound of the bodyguard positioning himself outside, and understood finally that her life had just pivoted on its axis and there was no going back to the version of it that had existed before 3 a.m. The night stretched like pulled taffy. Hospitals didn't have real time, Tiana decided. They had the time of machines beeping, the time of fluorescent light that never dimmed, the time of watching someone you love sleep while monitors proved they were still breathing. Mji had drifted off around midnight, his small body slack with exhaustion and medication. The nebulizer had been replaced with a smaller oxygen mask, just precautionary, the nurse had said, the fourth time she'd checked on them. His chest rose and fell with an ease that made Tiana's own breathing easier. She sat in the chair beside his bed, her legs curled under her, her hand resting on the mattress near his. Not touching, she'd learned that touching sometimes disturbed his sleep, sent his vitals spiking in ways that made the nurses frown, but close enough to feel like presence. Jihan hadn't left. That was the thing that kept sliding sideways in her mind. 5 years of absence, and he'd spent the last 6 hours with his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, asking questions in that low, focused way that made doctors straighten their spines. He'd actually ordered food, and someone had appeared with containers, and when Tiana couldn't eat, he'd eaten methodically like refueling a machine. Now he sat in the chair on the opposite side of Mji's bed, and in the half-light of the room, Tiana could see the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes kept tracking the monitors even when he was perfectly still. You should sleep, she said quietly. I will. He didn't look at her. When the sun comes up. That's how it's going to be, Tiana. His voice had that edge to it again, the one that made her understand why people did what he told them to do. One of us awake. Always. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that the hospital was safe, that Mji was stable, that paranoia didn't help anyone. Instead, she found herself thinking about how many nights she'd been awake alone, watching her son sleep, holding her breath through every pause in his breathing. How utterly exhausting that had been. You have a son, she said, and it came out like an accusation. You've always had a son. And you didn't know. No. Jihan's jaw tightened. I didn't. I left because, she stopped. Started again. I left because I was pregnant and terrified and you were already in too deep. And I told myself I was protecting him, but really I was punishing you. For the first time since they'd arrived at the hospital, Jihan looked at her. Really looked at her, with those dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. Were you? He asked. Was I what? Protecting him? Or punishing me? Tiana wanted to lie. Wanted to pretend it had been pure. that every decision she'd made had come from a place of maternal clarity. But she was too tired, and the hospital air was too honest, and Ji was sleeping safe 3 feet away because of Jihan's power, not her pride. Both, she whispered. It was both. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Tiana thought maybe he'd moved past it, that they could return to the careful negotiation of disaster. But then he said, I would have chosen differently. You would have gotten himself killed. Or gotten me killed. Or gotten Ji killed before he was even born. You don't know that. I do. She met his eyes across the space between them, across their sleeping child. Because I know you, Jihan. I know what you're capable of, and I know what you're willing to do. And I couldn't raise a child in that world. And now, the question hung there, fragile and dangerous. Now I don't have a choice, Tiana said flatly. He has asthma. He could have died tonight. And the only reason he didn't is because you got here in 60 seconds with a private hospital and doctors who don't ask questions. Jihan's hands tightened on the armrest of his chair. You always have a choice, Tiana. Do I? She laughed, bitter and small. Because it feels like my choices ended the moment I sent that text. Everything from here is just consequence. No. He stood abruptly, and her heart jumped until he simply moved to the other side of Mji's bed, to the window that overlooked Seoul's sleeping city. You can take him and go. I'll make sure you have money, resources, a new life somewhere far enough away that my world can't touch either of you. I'll sign whatever papers you want, give up whatever rights, become a check that arrives once a month. That's a choice. Tiana wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that was actually possible, that Jihan Han, who clearly had enough power to make hospitals bend to his will, could just step back. Or, she asked, or you let me be his father. Jihan's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched at his sides. Not the Mafia version. The father version. And you trust me to keep him safe. Those are the same thing, Tiana said. Maybe. He looked at Mji, at their son's sleeping face, and something in his expression fractured. But I'm going to try to be different. For him. Mji shifted in his sleep, one small hand coming up to touch the oxygen mask. Both of them moved. It was instinctive, both reaching out to soothe him, and their hands collided above the mattress. Tiana pulled back first. But not before she felt the warmth of his palm. Solid and real and unmistakably trembling. The memory came in pieces, the way memories do at 4 a.m. in a hospital room. Kingston, Jamaica. 2019. A club that was too loud and too expensive and exactly where Tiana had no business being, but her roommate had insisted, and Tiana had been 24 and stupid and convinced that one night out would erase the feeling of being invisible. She'd been working as a barista then, saving money for university, living in a shoebox apartment with 2 other girls, existing in the small careful space between ambition and survival. The club was called something in patois she couldn't quite remember now. All gold trim and bass that vibrated in your bones. And in a booth elevated above the dance floor, surrounded by men in suits, sat Jihan Han. She hadn't known his name then. Hadn't known anything about him. He'd been just a beautiful man with sharp cheekbones and dangerous eyes, watching the crowd like he was cataloging inventory. She'd felt him watching her. Later, much later, he would tell her it was because she was the only person in the club who hadn't noticed him. She'd been dancing with her roommate, lost in the music, and he'd been fascinated by that. By the idea of a woman who moved through the world as if his attention wasn't a currency everyone was fighting over. He'd sent a drink. She'd sent it back. He'd laughed. She could still see the shape of it, the way his whole face had changed, and come down from the booth to talk to her instead. That's a first, he'd said in English with an accent she couldn't place. What is? She'd asked, defensive. A woman who refuses my drink. Maybe I make my own drinks, Tiana had said, trying for cool and landing somewhere in the vicinity of terrified. He'd smiled like she'd just said something wise. Maybe you do. They'd talked for 3 hours. He'd asked about her dreams, and she'd told him about university, about wanting to study literature, about feeling stuck. He'd listened like what she said mattered, like the space between his attention and her words was the most important place in the room. By the end of the night, he'd given her his number and told her that if she ever needed help, with anything at all, she should call. She'd called 6 months later, When her mother had gotten sick and the medical bills had started piling up. When the barista job and the part-time tutoring hadn't been enough. Jihan had arrived with a check and a proposition. Come to Seoul with him. He had connections there, he said. He could help her get into a good university. She could have a fresh start. She hadn't asked why. Hadn't asked what he wanted in return. God, she'd been stupid. The first 3 months had been like a dream. A luxury apartment, university enrollment, Jihan introducing her to his world, like she was something precious he'd found and wanted to polish. He'd been attentive and careful and nothing like the criminal she'd seen in movies. He was just a businessman, he said. Import-export. Textiles. By the 4th month, she'd seen the gun in his desk drawer. By the 5th month, she'd understood what import-export actually meant. By the 6th month, she'd realized she was pregnant, and that Jihan, for all his talk of protecting her, would put that child in danger the moment he was born. She'd left at 7 months, when she could still fit through the window of her apartment and make it to the street. He'd found her 3 weeks later, sitting in a shelter in Busan, ready to have her baby in a public hospital with no plan beyond that. He'd brought her back. Not forcibly. Not really. He just asked. And she'd been weak enough, tired enough, frightened enough to say yes. Ji had been born in this same hospital or one like it. Private wing. Jihan holding her hand through the contractions, promising it would be different, that he would be different. For about 6 months he had been. Then she'd woken up to find men with guns in the living room, discussing something in Korean she didn't understand but the tone of which made her skin crawl. When she'd asked Jihan about it, he'd said it was business. When she'd said she couldn't raise a child in that environment, he'd said she was overreacting. When she'd packed a bag and left with Ji at 3 weeks old, he'd let her go. She'd never known if that was because he didn't care enough to stop her, or because he cared enough to let her choose. Tiana opened her eyes and found Jihan still standing at the window, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass, watching her watch him. You're thinking about when you left, he said. Not a question. How did you? Your face. He turned back to her. You make the same expression when you're remembering being angry at me. I was angry at you. I know. He moved back to his chair and sat down like it cost him something. I'm still angry at me. For not understanding soon enough what I was asking you to accept. Tiana didn't know what to say to that. So she said nothing, and let the monitor's beeping fill the space between them until Mji stirred. And Jihan reached out with infinite care to adjust his oxygen mask. Some things, she thought, couldn't be forgiven. Some things could only be endured. Dawn in Seoul looked different than dawn in Jamaica. Tiana had forgotten that, or maybe never known it. The way the sun hit the glass buildings and turned them pink. The way the city seemed to exhale after a long night holding its breath. She'd fallen asleep sometime around 5 a.m., her head against the armrest of the hospital chair, her hand still resting on Ji's mattress. She woke to the sound of voices in the hallway, firm, respectful, the kind of voices that came with influence. Jihan was awake. He always had been. He was speaking in rapid Korean with someone outside the room, and his tone had shifted into something that made her understand viscerally why people did what he asked them to do. The door opened. A woman entered who could only be his mother. She was tall, impeccably dressed, wearing what Tiana recognized as the kind of quiet wealth that came from old money and older power. Her hair was styled in a way that suggested she'd had a professional do it at 6 a.m. And her eyes, those were Jihan's eyes, sharp and cataloging and infinitely intelligent. She took in the scene in one glance, her son in a hospital chair, unshaved and exhausted. Tiana on the other side of the bed, hair matted, wearing the same damp t-shirt from last night. And in the bed, a small child with dark curls and an oxygen mask. So, Mrs. Han said in English, she had an accent, cultured and precise. This is my grandson. Tiana bolted upright, suddenly aware of how she looked, how the room looked, how the entire situation looked. Mrs. Han, Jihan said, and there was something almost vulnerable in his voice. This is Tiana. And that's Mji. Mji, Mrs. Han repeated, moving to the bedside with the kind of grace that came from a lifetime of knowing exactly where she belonged. She looked down at the sleeping boy, and her expression softened in a way that made her look less like a power broker and more like a grandmother. How long has he been asleep? Since midnight, Tiana said quickly. trying to remember the rules of talking to the mothers of Mafia bosses. He's stable, the doctors said. I read the chart, Mrs. Han said, not unkindly. Severe exacerbation. No rescue inhaler at home. She turned those sharp eyes to Tiana. That must have been very frightening. It wasn't a question, and there was no judgment in it, which somehow made it worse. Yes, Tiana whispered. Mrs. Han reached out and brushed one of Ng's dark curls back from his forehead, a gesture so tender it broke something in Tiana's chest. Come, she said to Tiana. You need coffee. And a shower if we can arrange it. You look like you're about to fall apart. I should stay. My son is here, Mrs. Han said, already moving toward the door. And my grandson is sleeping peacefully. The hospital has excellent security. You will not improve the situation by falling apart. It wasn't a suggestion. The shower was in a private bathroom attached to a private lounge that Tiana hadn't even known existed. Mrs. Han's influence clearly. Hot water and clean towels and someone's thoughtful provision of clean clothes in roughly her size appeared like magic. When Tiana emerged, Mrs. Han was sitting with 2 cups of coffee, watching Seoul wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. Sit, she said, gesturing to the chair beside her. Tiana sat. My son loves you, Mrs. Han said without preamble. Or he did. I'm not entirely sure what he feels now, but 5 years ago when you left he was unwell. Not physically, but emotionally, yes. Very unwell. Tiana didn't know what to say. I told him then that you had made a choice and he had to accept it, Mrs. Han continued. That if you wanted to be apart from him, that was your right. But he could not make you choose him by force or money or any of the tools he typically uses to get what he wants. And did he listen? Tiana asked quietly. Mrs. Han smiled. Not at all. He's been tracking you since you disappeared. He has people watching you, making sure you and G were safe. Very expensive people. Very loyal people. She took a sip of coffee. He never interfered, never attempted contact. But he never let you truly disappear either. Tiana felt something cold slide down her spine. He was protecting us? She asked. He was honoring your choice while refusing to accept its permanence. Mrs. Han set down her cup. He's a man who doesn't know how to want things moderately. His only options are absolute devotion or complete indifference, and even the indifference is performed, not real. Why are you telling me this? Mrs. Han turned to look at her fully. Because my grandson needs both of his parents, and because I think underneath all your justified fear, you never stopped loving my son either. You just couldn't figure out how to do it without dying. Tears burned in Tiana's eyes. She blinked them away viciously. Your world is dangerous, she said. The same thing she'd said to Jihan in the dark. Yes. Mrs. Han didn't argue. But my son is trying to change that. From G and possibly if you allow it for you. The question is whether you're willing to let him. G woke up at noon, asking for food and his mother, which the doctors called an excellent sign. He was eating applesauce from a plastic cup, and watching cartoons on a tablet that Jihan had produced from somewhere when the conversation turned serious. Mrs. Han had left with promises to return with clothes and supplies. The doctor had done his rounds, pronounced Ng's oxygen saturation excellent, and recommended discharge in the morning if he continued to improve, which meant they were running out of the strange pocket of time that hospitals provided, the space where consequences were suspended and nothing had to be decided. We need to talk about what happens next, Jihan said. They were in the hallway, Ng distracted by animated dogs on screen, the bodyguard positioned strategically out of earshot. Tiana's heart was pounding. Okay. I want to be his father. Jihan's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched. Not in theory. In practice. I want to see him, to be involved in decisions about his health and education and life. I want him to know who I am. And what do I get? Tiana asked, not bothering with softness. What do you want? Safety. For him and for me. Financial security that isn't contingent on my relationship with you. And a guarantee that you won't try to control me or my life. Jihan nodded slowly. The first 2 I can do. The third. Non-negotiable. I was going to say I'll try. I'm not good at letting go of things I care about. But I'll try because the alternative is losing him again. And I won't survive that twice. The words hung between them, raw and true. I'll need everything in writing, Tiana said. Child support, health insurance, education fund. And I want to be able to move within reason without your permission. Yes. We'll have lawyers draw it up. And you can't bring violence to our home. No business, no meetings, no men with guns. He can't see that. Agreed. But Tiana. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I will need security around you and him. Not bodyguards in your apartment. But close enough to react if something happens. She wanted to refuse. But she thought about the kidnapping attempt that hadn't happened yet. About a man's love expressed through surveillance. About a son who needed his father alive more than he needed his mother's pride. Discreet, she said. I don't want to know about them. You won't. They stood in the hallway of a private hospital, making deals like it was a business transaction, when really it was the most important negotiation of both their lives. Okay, Tiana said finally. But if you break any of this, if you ever put Nji at risk, I will take him and disappear so completely that even your surveillance network won't find us. Do you understand? I understand. Jihan met her eyes. And I won't break it. That's a promise I can keep. Discharge was anticlimactic. A nurse gave them a folder of papers. The doctor repeated instructions about the inhaler and the maintenance medication. And a woman from the administrative office appeared to handle paperwork that Tiana didn't entirely understand. Nji was excited about leaving, waving goodbye to the nurses who cooed at him, energized by the medication and rest. He held Jihan's hand as they walked to the car, which felt like it was happening in a different timeline, where this was normal and natural. The sedan was waiting, gleaming black and somehow ominous in daylight. Jihan sat beside Nji in the back, not beside Tiana. That felt deliberate, a choice about where his loyalty sat now. The bodyguard drove, and Seoul unfolded around them in a way Tiana had forgotten. Efficient in glass and entirely unconcerned with her interior falling apart. Appa, where do you live? Nji asked, using the Korean word for father like he'd always known it. Tiana's breath caught. Jihan's hand tightened on Nji's shoulder, but his voice was casual. In a very big building with a very big window. Would you like to see it? Yes, Nji said. Mama, can we see Appa's house? Tiana looked at Jihan over her son's head. Saw something in his expression that looked like hope, carefully contained. Not today, baby, she said gently. Today we go home and rest. The car turned toward her neighborhood, toward the small apartment that suddenly felt even smaller, even more poverty-stricken, knowing that Jihan was seeing it through the lens of his own wealth, seeing what she'd been denying him access to for 4 years. When they pulled up to her building, Jihan's face went very still. This is where you've been living, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Tiana said defensively. And it's been fine. We've been fine. He didn't argue. He just carried Nji up the narrow staircase, and Tiana watched his perfect suit get brushed by walls that hadn't been painted in 5 years, watched him duck to avoid the light fixture that hung slightly too low, watched him see exactly how little she'd had. Inside, the apartment was clean but sparse. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was mostly about necessity rather than comfort. Nji's room was decorated with care. Drawings on the walls, books on shelves, a bed frame Tiana had assembled herself. Jihan looked at it all like he was memorizing it for evidence. We'll get you something better, he said finally. We're fine, Tiana repeated, but they both knew it was a lie. He came back 3 days later, and with him came a man carrying boxes. Not just any boxes. Medical boxes. Equipment. A proper nebulizer machine, not the ancient one Tiana had been improvising with. An air purifier that looked like it cost more than her furniture. Shelving for medications. A humidifier shaped like something Nji would actually enjoy looking at. What are you doing? Tiana asked, watching from the kitchen doorway. Ensuring my son has the tools he needs to breathe, Jihan said simply, and he was already rolling up his sleeves, already assembling the nebulizer with focused precision. Nji watched from his bed, fascinated. Appa is so smart, he said. Jihan paused. Tiana saw his hands tremble just slightly before he resumed. Come here, little one, he said. Let me show you how this works. This is your new friend. When you feel like you can't breathe, we turn it on and it helps you. Watching them together was like watching two puzzle pieces click into place. Ji with his hand on Jihan's shoulder, following instructions, asking questions. Jihan patient and present in a way that made Tiana understand, suddenly, that this was what he would have been all along if his world hadn't been built on money and power and danger. When the equipment was installed, they sat on Ji's small bed, all three of them fitting awkwardly into the space. "I want to sleep over sometimes," Jihan said to Ji. "Would that be okay?" Ji looked at Tiana. "Not yet," Tiana said, and it was softer than it might have been. "But soon. When you're feeling stronger." Jihan nodded, accepted the boundary without fight. But when he left, pressing a kiss to Ji's forehead and letting his hand linger against Tiana's shoulder for 1 second longer than necessary, she understood that the real negotiation had just begun. Will Tiana let Jihan back into their lives completely? Or will his dangerous world tear them apart again? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Do you think she should trust him? And what would you do in her position? While you're here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell. The story is about to get intense and you won't want to miss a single moment. The phone call came at 2 a.m., which was never good. Jihan didn't wake Tiana. She learned about it the next morning when she found him in her kitchen, sitting at the small table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, his face etched in ways that made him look 10 years older. "What happened?" she asked immediately. "Nothing happened. Everything's fine." He said it like he was reading from a script. "Ji's breathing is good." "Jihan." He set down the coffee carefully like it might shatter. "Dmitry Volkov knows about Ji." Tiana felt the world tilt. Dmitry Volkov was a name she'd heard exactly once, in the early days when she'd been foolish enough to ask about Jihan's business. He'd explained in careful, controlled language that Volkov was someone who wanted what Jihan had, and that someday there might be a conflict about it. "How?" she asked. "My people aren't sure. But Volkov has a network. He finds leverage." Jihan's jaw tightened. "He's known about Ji for at least a month, possibly longer." Tiana sank into the chair across from him. "And he's planning to use it." Jihan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human it broke her heart. "Against me. To make moves, to negotiate, to prove that I'm vulnerable in ways I've never been vulnerable before." "What does that mean?" "It means I need to eliminate the threat," Jihan said flatly. "Permanently." "You're going to kill him?" "Yes." The word hung there, casual and absolute. Tiana thought about the man she'd fallen in love with in a club in Kingston. Thought about his promises that he was different, that his business was just business. Thought about all the ways she'd been naive enough to believe him. "Does this come with our agreement?" she asked quietly. "Did I sign up for this?" "No." Jihan looked at her directly. "You didn't. Which is why I'm telling you. So you can decide if you want to take Ji and leave before this gets worse." Tiana wanted to. God, she wanted to. But she thought about the private hospital, about the equipment in Ji's room, about the security that Jihan had quietly put in place, about the fact that Volkov already knew about their son, which meant leaving would only make them more of a target, not less. "How long?" she asked. "A week. Maybe 2. And then it's over. And we're safe." Tiana wasn't sure she believed him, but she was sure that she didn't have anywhere else to go. The diner was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. Tiana was used to the rhythm of it, the construction workers who came in at 11:30, the students at 2 p.m., the business people who wanted something quick and efficient. She moved through the space with practiced ease, balancing plates, refilling coffee, existing in the small comfortable space of being useful. The man at table 7 was the thing that threw off the rhythm. He wasn't old, wasn't young. He was the kind of nondescript that made him memorable precisely because he was so forgettable. He sat alone, ordered a coffee and toast, and spent 2 hours watching the restaurant instead of eating. By hour 3, Tiana was very aware that he was watching her. "Who's your friend?" Mrs. Kim asked, not bothering with subtlety, when Tiana came back to the kitchen. "I don't know. He's been here all afternoon." "Handsome in a creepy way," Mrs. Kim observed. "You need me to call someone?" Tiana's mouth went dry. Who would you call? But she knew. She knew exactly who Mrs. Kim would call. "I'm fine," Tiana said. He's probably just. The man waved her over. Tiana's every instinct screamed to refuse. Instead, she walked to his table, notepad in hand, her customer service smile frozen in place. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. "Just information," he said, and his accent was Russian or Eastern European, something heavy and careful. "You have a son, yes?" "Gee." Tiana's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the notepad. "How do you? Where does he go to school? Where does he spend his afternoons? Who picks him up?" The man smiled, and it was the smile of someone asking about the weather, not about her child's schedule. "This is information I need. I'm not telling you anything." Tiana turned to walk away. "Then he will have an accident," the man said conversationally. "A small accident. Nothing permanent. Just enough that his breathing becomes difficult. Asthma attacks can happen at any time, yes? Very unpredictable. Especially if someone wanted to make them worse." Tiana spun back. "If you touch him, you'll what?" The man was still smiling. "Call your boyfriend? Tell him that Dimitri sent me? Tell him that his son is already in danger, and only cooperation will keep the boy safe." Mrs. Kim appeared from the kitchen, phone in hand. "I already called," she said to Tiana. 3 minutes ago. Help is coming." The man stood slowly, no longer smiling. He left money on the table, more than enough for the untouched coffee and toast, and walked out of the diner with the kind of unhurried certainty that said he'd accomplished exactly what he came to do. Tiana stood in the middle of the restaurant, shaking, while Mrs. Kim pulled her into the back and made her sit down. "Breathe," Mrs. Kim said. "Just breathe." But Tiana was already thinking about Mji, already thinking about how fast a car could drive to his school, already thinking about all the ways she'd been foolish enough to believe they could have normal. Jihan arrived at the diner in under 10 minutes. He came with the bodyguard, and he moved through the space like a force of nature, extracting Tiana from Mrs. Kim's careful ministrations and pulling her into the car before she'd fully processed what was happening. "He's at school," Tiana said immediately before Jihan could ask. "I checked. He's safe. They confirmed it." "I know." Jihan's grip on her arm was firm but not painful. "He's being moved to a secure location right now. My people are handling it." "Without asking me?" "Yes. He's my son." "He's our son," Jihan said, and his voice was ice. "And right now, keeping him alive is the only thing that matters." The car was moving, weaving through Seoul traffic with the kind of aggressive precision that came from a driver who knew they were backed by enough power to break rules. "I want him with me," Tiana said. "That's not safe." "I don't care. I want my son. You can't take him away from me." "I'm not taking him away. I'm keeping him alive." Jihan turned to her fully, and she saw something in his expression that looked like desperation. Volkov knows about him now. He knows his school, his routine, probably his doctor. That man at the diner was a message. A warning. And the next move will be worse. "So what? You take him to your fortress and I what? Sit here and wonder. You come with him." Jihan said it like it was obvious. "You both come to my penthouse. Full security, my people and me. For as long as it takes to end this. And if I refuse? Then Volkov uses you as leverage. He takes you to force my hand. He hurts you to make me cooperate. Or worse." Jihan's voice cracked slightly. "He uses you to get to Mji." Tiana wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence, on her right to make her own decisions, on the autonomy she'd fought so hard to build. Instead, she thought about a man asking casually where her son went to school. "For how long?" she asked quietly. 2 weeks. Maybe a month. And then the threat is eliminated and you have your life back." "Do I?" Tiana asked. "Or do I just live with the knowledge that your world can find me anywhere, anytime, and the only thing keeping my son safe is your power?" Jihan didn't answer because they both knew the truth. "I need to get Mji's things," Tiana said finally. "Clothes, his favorite toys. His inhaler. It's already being handled." "Of course it is," she said bitterly. "Because you knew I'd refuse, so you decided for me." "I decided to keep you alive," Jihan said, and there was no apology in his voice. "Everything else is secondary." The car pulled into an underground garage that Tiana had never seen before, somewhere beneath Seoul's glittering surface, and she understood that her old life had just officially ended. It had been 2 days before Tiana was allowed to be alone with Mji. 2 days of Jihan's penthouse, which was exactly as beautiful and cold as she'd imagined. 2 days of Mji adjusting to marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Seoul that stretched to the horizon. 2 days of her feeling like a prisoner in a gilded cage, while Jihan moved in and out, taking calls in low Korean, leaving at odd hours and returning with bruises she didn't ask about. On the 3rd day, she insisted on going to get Mji from his temporary school, a private institution that Jihan had enrolled him in, one that provided security in small class sizes and everything she would have wanted for him if the world hadn't suddenly become dangerous. Jihan sent 3 guards in an unmarked car. "Just in case," he said, kissing the top of her head in a gesture that felt almost normal. "Just to be safe." Tiana had nodded because what choice did she have? The walk from school to the car was less than 50 meters. The guards were positioned at intervals, one ahead, one beside, one behind. It was late afternoon, the sun starting its descent toward evening, the air cooling slightly. Mji was holding her hand, chattering about his teacher and the friends he'd made. He'd adjusted better than Tiana had, which broke her heart. The van appeared from nowhere. Not literally, there were moments where Tiana would replay it and understand that it had to have been sitting there, engine running, driver waiting. But in the moment it was just suddenly there, sliding sideways across the street to block their path. Men in dark clothes poured out of the sliding doors. Tiana's scream came out without conscious thought. She grabbed Mji and ran toward the guards. But her body was slow and soft from 5 years of living a quiet life, and the men were fast and hard and entirely focused. One of them grabbed her arm. She did what some animal part of her brain told her to do. She let go of Mji and swung the man's own momentum against him, the way a bouncer at that Kingston club had shown her once, in what felt like a different lifetime. His grip loosened just enough. Mji was crying, reaching for her, and one of the guards had him, was already running back toward the parked car. The other guard had a gun out, not pointed at the men but at the ground, ready. Tiana ran. The man who'd grabbed her reached for her again, and she kicked. Not elegant, not trained, just desperate and wild. Her shoe connected with something soft and he doubled over. The second of hesitation was all it took. The guard fired a shot into the ground. A warning shot maybe, or maybe something more. The men in the van scattered and there was shouting in Russian and Korean, and then Tiana was being pulled into a car that smelled like leather and automotive interior. Mji was in her arms before she'd fully registered the car was moving. "Mama," he was saying. "Mama, mama, mama. I'm here," she whispered, holding him so tight she was terrified she was hurting him. "I'm here, baby, I'm here." The guard who'd pulled them in was speaking rapidly into his comm unit. "Package secure. Returning to base. One assailant down, status unknown. Threat dispersing." Tiana didn't care about assailants or status. She held her son and shook and tried very hard not to think about what would have happened if the guards had been even a second slower. Jihan was waiting when they arrived. His face when he saw them was something Tiana had never seen before. Raw, unchecked terror followed by a fury so complete it seemed to reshape his features. "Get them inside," he said to no one in particular. And then he was gone, moving back toward his office with the kind of focused rage that made everyone in his path move faster. Tiana carried Mji inside, into the gleaming penthouse that suddenly felt less like a cage and more like a fortress. A housekeeper appeared, offering water and tea, and the kind of gentle Korean that Tiana didn't understand. Mji was in shock, not crying anymore, just staring at nothing with the expression of a child who just learned that the world wasn't safe. It took 3 hours before Jihan came back. He looked like he'd been to war. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt was torn at the collar, and there was blood. She wasn't sure if it was his on his hands. "Don't," Tiana said when he moved toward Mji. "He's asleep. Please don't." "I'm not going to wake him," Jihan said quietly. He looked at his son's sleeping face for a long moment, and something in his expression cracked. "I brought this to your door. To both of you. I brought death to you. You brought protection," Tiana said, and it surprised her how calm she sounded. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't known Volkov was a threat, that man would have taken him. "Yes. And I created the situation where that man even knew he existed. Jihan's hands clenched. You were right to hate me. You were right to leave. You were right about all of it. I don't hate you, Tiana said, and it was true, which was worse. But I can't do this. I can't raise my son in a world where he can be taken off the street because of who his father is. Then take him and go, Jihan said, and he meant it. She could hear it in his voice. The offer was real, the resources would be there. The sacrifice was already decided. I'll set you up somewhere so far away that Volkov will never find you. I'll disappear from your lives. You'll be safe. Tiana wanted to. Every rational part of her wanted to gather Mji and run and never look back. But she thought about the hospital. About Mji's severe asthma attack at 3 a.m. About what would have happened if she hadn't had Jihan's resources, his connections, his absolute power to make the medical system bend to his will. What's going to happen? She asked instead. To Volkov. He's going to stop being a problem, Jihan said flatly. Permanently. And after that? After that, I don't know. I've never had a child before. I've never had to choose between my empire and keeping someone I love alive. He looked at her directly. So I'm going to ask you. What do you want? Not what's possible. Not what's smart. What do you actually want? Tiana thought about it. I want Mji to be safe, she said finally. I want him to have a father who shows up for his asthma attacks at 3 a.m. I want to not be terrified all the time. And I want. She stopped. What? I want to stop punishing you for things you haven't done yet, she said quietly. I want to stop assuming the worst. I want to try. Jihan crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, and she felt him shaking. Actually shaking. Like he'd been holding himself together with nothing but force of will. We'll figure it out, he said into her hair. I swear to you, Tiana. We'll figure it out. This is it. The moment everything changes. Jihan is about to face Volkov in a confrontation that will determine whether Tiana and Mji can ever truly be safe. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, smash that subscribe button and trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. Comment Team Jihan if you're rooting for him, or Team Tiana if you think she should run. Let's see where everyone stands. A week of living in the penthouse felt like a month. Tiana had discovered that Jihan's world had rhythms she'd never bothered to understand before. He woke at 5 a.m. He showered while reading reports on a tablet. He had coffee black and ate breakfast standing up, usually while on the phone. By 7 a.m. he was gone. By 8 p.m. he was back. It was this consistency that slowly began to reshape how she thought about him. He didn't bring his empire into the apartment. The violence stayed outside. The business stayed outside. What came into the penthouse was a man who learned how to make Mji's favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs cut into tiny pieces, toast with butter not too much, and milk exactly at the right temperature, because Tiana had mentioned it once. A man who sat on the floor and played with Mji's toys, understanding the rules of complex imaginary games with the focused intensity he probably applied to his business. A man who helped Tiana cook dinner, chopping vegetables with efficient knife skills while asking about her day. How was work? He asked one evening, sliding zucchini into a pan with practiced ease. Tiana paused. She'd taken a job at a better restaurant, one that Jihan's connections had helped her access, where the pay was good and the hours were reasonable. It was fine. One of the cooks was training and kept messing up the orders, but she stopped. It was fine. Normal. I liked it. Good, Jihan said, and he meant it. You deserve normal. That night Mji had a small coughing fit. Not an attack, Jihan was careful to distinguish between the two. Just a normal child cough, the kind any 4-year-old might have. But both of them moved at the sound. Tiana got the nebulizer. Jihan got the inhaler from the bedside table. They'd learned to keep backup inhalers everywhere. A small acknowledgement of their shared terror. Together, they sat with Mji on his bed, speaking in low voices, walking him through the breathing exercises. In through your nose, out through your mouth, Tiana said. Like we practiced. You're doing so good, baby. So brave, Jihan added, his hand steady on Mji's back. The cough faded. Mji drifted back to sleep between them. Tiana and Jihan sat there in the dark. Not touching but closer than they'd been in years, watching their son breathe easily. "This is what I wanted," Jihan whispered, even when I didn't know what it was. "This." Tiana didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. The news came on a Thursday morning. Jihan was on his phone before Tiana fully woke, his voice steady but his jaw tight. He was speaking in rapid Korean, and the few words she understood, Volkov, warehouse, situation resolved, told her everything. It was done. When he hung up, he looked different. Emptied. Like he'd set something down that he'd been carrying for a very long time. "Is it?" Tiana started. "Yes," he said. "It's finished. Volkov is no longer a threat. Ever." Tiana didn't ask for details. Some part of her understood that she didn't want to know exactly what finished meant. How much blood was involved? How many people had died to protect their son? Instead, she got out of bed and made him coffee. They sat together in the kitchen as dawn broke over Seoul, and Jihan drank the coffee and held her hand like it was the most important business he'd ever conducted. "You can go back to your apartment if you want," he said quietly. "The threat is gone. You have your life back." "Do I?" Tiana asked. "Yes. Whatever you choose. Wherever you want to be." Tiana thought about her tiny apartment, about her old job, about the narrow life she'd built on the foundation of running away. Then she thought about this penthouse, about Jihan making Ji's scrambled eggs, about the knowledge that there was nothing in the world that could touch her son now because his father wouldn't allow it. "I don't want my old life back," she said. "I want." She stopped, unsure how to say it. "What?" Jihan prompted. "I want this. I want us. I want to stop being afraid." Jihan pulled her into him, and this time she didn't pull away. But fear didn't disappear just because the threat had. Jihan's final business with Volkov, the thing that had to happen to truly end the threat, required him to be there in person. It was the only way, he'd explained. The only way to make sure it was final, to make sure Volkov's network didn't retaliate, to make sure Tiana and Ji would truly be safe. Tiana watched him leave that night, and she was very aware it might be the last time she saw him alive. He returned the next morning, injured but moving. Ji ran to him before Tiana could stop him, and Jihan scooped him up with a slight wince, careful not to jar his left shoulder, which was bandaged beneath his shirt. "Appa," Ji said, delighted. "You came back." "Of course I came back," Jihan said, and his voice was hoarse. "I always come back." Tiana helped him inside, made him sit down, and carefully removed his shirt to assess the damage. A knife wound on his shoulder, bandaged by someone who knew what they were doing. Bruises blooming across his ribs. His left hand wrapped in gauze. She cleaned him up with the kind of efficiency that comes from not thinking too hard about what you're doing. Applied fresh bandages. Made him drink water. Made him eat something, though she could see it hurt. Only after Mji was asleep did she let herself fall apart. "I can't do this," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bathroom sink while Jihan stood under warm water, moving slowly. "I can't watch you keep getting hurt." "It's the last time," Jihan said, and he turned to face her, water streaming down his face. "I swear it. I'm done. I'm going to step back from the business. Hand it over to people I trust. Take a legitimate position in legitimate companies. I'm done with the fighting." "You can't just stop," Tiana said. "People don't just." "I can, and I am." He stepped out of the shower and pulled her into him, heedless of the water. "I have a son. I have you if you'll have me. That's what I want. That's all I want." "You'll resent me," Tiana said. "You'll give up your empire for us and someday you'll resent me." "No." Jihan pulled back just far enough to make her look at him. "I'll look at Mji every single day, and I'll know that I made the right choice. I'll look at you and I'll know I made the right choice." He was crying, which she'd never seen him do, actual tears running down his face, mixing with the shower water, making him look younger and more human and terrifyingly vulnerable. "I was more afraid to let you love him than to let him die without you," she said, repeating the words he'd said to her months ago in the hospital. "I know," Jihan said. "But you're not anymore, are you?" Tiana shook her head. The lawyers came on a Tuesday morning, bringing papers that outlined their new life. Jihan had set up a fund from Ji's education, enough to cover university and beyond. He'd established a trust in Tiana's name, Money that was entirely hers, independent of their relationship. He'd created a deed for a new apartment, one that belonged to both of them, in a secure building with good schools nearby. "I'm stepping back from the family business," he explained, pointing to clauses in the document. "My cousin will take over. I'm taking a position in the hospitality division. Legitimate business, good salary, normal hours. I'll be home by 6 every evening." "And if you change your mind?" Tiana asked. "I won't. But if you do, then you take Mji and go," Jihan said simply. "You have the resources. You have my permission. You have a life waiting for you anywhere you want it to be." Tiana read through the documents, understanding that this was Jihan's way of promising. Not with words or declarations but with actual concrete structures. With legal documents and financial provisions and an escape route built into the very foundation of their life together. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, I choose you." Jihan closed his eyes like she'd just given him permission to breathe. "We should do something," he said after a moment. "Something to mark this. Get married maybe, or—" "Not yet," Tiana said. "Let's just be. For a while. Let me know you. Let Mji know you. And then if we still want to, we'll get married." "How long?" Jihan asked. "I don't know. A year." "A year," he repeated like he was memorizing it. "Okay, I can wait a year. I've waited 5 years already." 3 months later it was night again. Tiana woke to the sound of Mji coughing, but before the old fear could grab her, she realized it was different. Just a small cough, the kind any child might have. She got out of bed. She and Jihan had finally crossed that threshold, and now they shared a bed, and found Jihan already moving. "It's okay," he said softly. "I've got him." They moved together into Mji's room, two people who'd learned the dance of keeping their son breathing. Tiana turned on the small nightlight shaped like a moon while Jihan checked Mji's inhaler, verified the oxygen sat reading on the monitor they kept on his nightstand. "All fine. All safe. Is it an attack?" Mji asked sleepily. "No, baby," Tiana said, settling onto the edge of his bed. "Just a little cough. Your body's just clearing itself out. Appa's here, I'm here. You're safe." "I know," Mji said, in the uncomplicated way that children had of believing what you told them. "Appa's always here now." Tiana met Jihan's eyes over their son's head, and she saw something there that looked like peace. They sat with Mji until his breathing eased, until he drifted back to sleep, and then they moved back to their own bed, Jihan's arm around Tiana's waist, her back against his chest, both of them still half awake and listening for any change in the silence. No panic. No desperation. No running. Just a family breathing together. Morning came soft and gold. Tiana moved through the apartment in the ritual she developed, coffee first, then checking on Mji, then getting ready for her shift at the restaurant. The new apartment was smaller than the penthouse, but it was theirs. They'd chosen it together, picked out furniture, hung Mji's drawings on the walls. Jihan was in the kitchen in a shirt and slacks, assembling Mji's breakfast with the focused intensity he brought to everything. When Mji wandered out, sleep-rumpled and asking for his toast, Jihan was ready, butter melting, eggs still warm, milk in his favorite cup. "Appa, after school can we go to the park?" Mji asked, his mouth full. "Yes," Jihan said immediately. "I get off at 5. We'll go to the park, feed the ducks, and then your mama will meet us for dinner." It was a life. Ordinary and small, and exactly what Tiana had been running toward without knowing it. She kissed Mji goodbye and squeezed Jihan's shoulder, still being careful of the healing wound, and headed out to work. The building security greeted her by name now. The street felt safe. The city felt navigable. At night, when she got home, Jihan and Mji were on the couch, watching cartoons and eating popcorn that they probably made specifically to irritate her. "I cleaned it up," Jihan said defensively, which was only slightly true. Mji climbed into her lap, and Jihan wrapped an arm around them both. And Tiana felt the weight of his love like something physical. This was what she'd been afraid of. Not the danger or the violence or the crime. She'd been afraid of needing him, of being dependent on him, of choosing him and discovering that choice had been wrong all along. But 3 months in, it didn't feel wrong. Felt like coming home. Later, after Mji was asleep, Tiana and Jihan sat on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out at Seoul's glittering lights. His arm was around her shoulders, and she was leaning into him, and the city spread out before them like a promise. "Thank you," Jihan said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a chance. For giving us a chance." "You almost died," Tiana said. "Several times over. For someone who's supposed to be stepping back from the criminal underworld, you're still getting pretty badly injured." "I know." He kissed the top of her head. "But I'm doing it different now. I'm doing it for him. For you. That matters." "It does," Tiana agreed. "It really does." They sat there as the night deepened. Two people who'd come to each other through violence and fear and desperation, and somehow found something that looked like love in the spaces between survival. Down the hallway in his room, Ji slept easily, his breathing steady, and even the small miracle of his lungs working the way lungs were supposed to work. Outside their window, the city hummed. And in the apartment, in the carefully constructed normalcy they'd built together, Tiana and Jihan held each other and breathed. All three of them safe, all three of them home. Did you love Tiana and Jihan's story? Then you need to check out my other videos. Link in description. Subscribe for new emotional, high-stakes Afro-Korean romance stories.